Making a horror film that centers around war can be a difficult task. War is already a horrifying event to experience, and its terror continues even when the war is over. Being masterful enough to convey the damage of war without having it set on a battlefield is an impressive task. Without the gunfire, explosions, the cry of wounded soldiers, packing fear into the situation without these elements can be tricky. Utilizing the real decisions made in war and its cultural impact on society can be used as a way to convey the horrors of war, not only for those involved in it, but also those in their home countries experiencing the consequences of war from a distance. Martin Scorsese, known for his many successful films over the past few decades, does exactly this in his 1967 short film, The Big Shave, its alternate title, Viet 67. Scorsese uses an almost daily occurrence as a metaphor for one of the worst wars in American history that had some of the biggest impact on U.S. culture and did damage beyond repair to most of the soldiers involved. Scorsese made this short film as a student at Tisch School of Arts, using his medium as a way to critique the ongoing Vietnam War and the damage it was doing to the U.S.'s image. At only 6 minutes long and containing no dialogue, the message is loud and clear on what it's saying. Now, there's not enough time in this video for me to get fully in depth on the inner workings of politics of the Vietnam War, like how the US gave its own troops subpar weapons, but I will try my best to give relevant information as well as a brief description of America in the years prior to the war. Knowing the events leading up to and during the Vietnam War gives a much clearer picture to the message of the Big Shave. Coming out of World War II in 1945, America was growing into a new nation, not only as a global superpower, but on its own soil. With the GI Bill introduced by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, returning soldiers of World War II were able to readjust back into their daily lives with opportunities for higher education, training within the trades, and government support for owning a home. The American economy barely wavered while these soldiers were away, and it would only stay steady at their return, as production of wartime materials shifted into other means of production like automotive and appliances. All of these positive factors within society led to the baby boom, and America's middle class was beginning to grow and thrive, but little did these hardworking men and women know that this joy and comfort would soon begin to fall. Now, directly before the Vietnam War, in 1950, American soldiers found themselves in South Korea fighting a North Korean attempt at a communist invasion for 3 years. This war would drag out with unclear goals of the American military and take many lives of American soldiers, causing the folks back home to become distrustful of the government and grow heartbroken by the high casualties of the war. The Korean War was the gateway to the U.S. military receiving a large budget increase, as well as the government getting cozier with defense contractors, giving birth to the military-industrial complex. Unfortunately, this piece of American history is often overshadowed by its predecessor and its successor, but the Korean War was a glimpse into what was to come in the near future for the U.S. military. Come 1964, 16,500 U.S. military members would find themselves in Vietnam amidst what seemed to be a never-ending war. Stemming back to post-World War II, the Vietnam War didn't emerge from nowhere. Starting with the First Indochina War in 1945, then turning into a political back and forth on dividing or unifying the country of Vietnam, and ending with the Civil War for Vietnamese people, which disguised a proxy war for the ongoing Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. America had at first played a role in advisory and financial support to the state of Vietnam, which would be Southern Vietnam, so anti-communist, in 1950, but that would over the years turn into a full-blown military presence. Within the horrors of this war, guerrilla warfare was at the heart, tens of thousands of US soldiers dying from these tactics. From being ambushed, to booby traps, to being tricked by Viet Cong soldiers, to the intense humidity and unforgiving dense jungle, U.S. soldiers were losing their lives, and those that made it through each day grew weary not only from the loss and their work, but also growing political and social tensions back home. In 1972, a ceasefire would take place, removing U.S. troops from the war and pausing the conflict, but this wasn't by any means a political win. North Vietnam would eventually get the upper hand, U.S. troops returning to South Vietnam to evacuate South Vietnamese, U.S., and foreign nationals from the embassy as well as Vietnamese citizens, as their defense fell to the northern communists, sealing their loss. When the U.S. pulled its final combat troop out of Vietnam in 1973, the damage of the war had extended much farther than the land it was on. Many controversial and outright criminal things occurred during the Vietnam War, on all sides, which back on U.S. soil was causing quite the shift in perspective within society. From seeing returning World War II soldiers as heroes to seeing soldiers returning from Vietnam as monsters. In 1978, U.S. polling found that roughly 72%, so like 3/4 of Americans, believed that the Vietnam War was, quote, fundamentally wrong and immoral, end quote. The U.S. government first implementing the draft, then having spent around $168 billion on the war over 2 decades, having it proven that war crimes had been committed by the U.S. military, and having used napalm and Agent Orange as chemical weapons that would horrifically impact not only Vietnamese people, but also U.S. troops exposed to the chemicals, the U.S. government and troops had a poor reputation at home. There was a turbulent era in the U.S. after the Vietnam War ended. Things had begun to change while these soldiers were away, with the free speech movement and civil rights movement having taken place, and the already existing anti-war protesters. Many U.S. citizens were upset by either the government, the military, or both. The once grandesque image of the U.S. and its military had crashed, tarnished its name to its own citizens, and left an ugly scar on the history of America. All right, now that we know what was happening in the world during the time the short film was made, we can actually talk about it. Martin Scorsese, being a film student at the time, was only 25 when he wrote and directed The Big Shave as a criticism of the Vietnam War. Now, when watching this film, you most likely wouldn't connect its content to a decades-long war fighting communism, let alone that it had anything to do with the military-industrial complex. But with its alternate title, Viet 67, and a post-credit to Herman Melville for whiteness, as a nod to his novella Benita Sereno, there's subtlety in its interpretation. Opening with a white title card that fades to a stark white bathroom that is by no means luxurious, we see various close-up shots of different fixtures and items within the bathroom. The shiny faucets, the chrome shower head, a toothbrush, then landing on a medicine cabinet with a mirror. The still shot fades to white before a man enters the bathroom. Upon the man entering, he begins to prepare for a shave, though his face is fairly smooth already. This well-kept shiny bathroom is, I think, a representation of the U.S. Post-World War II. Things were clean and orderly, society had more or less fallen into a routine, and things were going pretty well for most people. The man's face acts as a stand-in for the U.S. government that had been in office at the end of World War II, appearing to be clean-shaven and scar-free. Applying shave cream and wetting his single-blade razor, the man begins to shave his face, and all is well at first. A lot of close-up shots on his action, with some angles emphasizing his eyes or the razor. As the foam on his face begins to dwindle, the man reapplies more shave cream and starts to shave again, almost immediately nicking himself, but he ignores it. Continuing on, the man nicks himself again and again and again, ignoring the bleeding cuts as more and more blood flows from his face. This man could represent kind of two ideas. He could represent a soldier sealing his own fate and having control over his destiny instead of a government that doesn't value his life. This would be related to the Herman Melville credit at the end of the movie. So Herman Melville is best known for his book Moby Dick, but he also wrote a novella called Benito Sereno, a novella about a Spanish slave ship experiencing a revolt when another captain happens upon the ship. Within the story, a slave who is the leader of the revolt shaves the visiting captain's face, intentionally nicking the man to show authority over him despite the unawareness the captain has of the revolt and the standing dynamic between him and the slave. Or the man in the big shave could be a representation for the self-destruction of the U.S. government and America's image as it navigates the difficult times of the Vietnam War. The government's poor decisions acting as the razor, mutilating itself and America's image. Going from the man's ever-growing wounds, an abrupt edit to the sink collecting droplets of blood replaces his mutilation. Continually, there's abrupt close-ups from the sink to the man's injured face to the razor, emphasizing the growing amount of blood. The man doesn't stop shaving, though, and his nicks grow heavier and heavier, the once pristine sink becoming a basin of blood. Suddenly, it jumps to a side profile shot of the man, taking the single blade razor across his neck, one angle of the scene from the left, then an angle from the right. A large gash is shown across his throat, creating a waterfall of blood that gushes into the sink. His feet revealed to have blood covering them before showing the man finishing up his shave. Seeing his torso now flooded with a river of blood slowly cascading down, the man's bloody, shaky hand places the razor gently on the edge of the sink before the screen fades to red, ending this 6-minute film. The frequent close-up hard cuts shifting from the man's face, the bloodied sink, to the razor is almost hypnotic, a jarring act that you can't turn your eyes from. Similar to how American citizens were witnessing the government's ongoing poor decisions as things grew more unrestful within American society. Having not only lost the war, but tens of thousands of men and pissing off pretty much the whole country, the US government had drugged the blade across its own throat with its ongoing efforts. Having the static shot go from the bloody throat gash to the blood-soaked feet shows how the government had wounded itself, and the first part stained being the lower class, those primarily drafted into the war. Then going up to the torso, which is now blanketed in blood, would be the middle class. Though people in the middle class were more likely able to get college deferment from the draft, they still faced being drafted, and some even volunteered to go, letting them have more control over their fate in the military. And as this war grew in costs, there was a small tax increase in 1968 on the middle class, but this would do little to deter the growing inflation and stagnant wages within the country. Funds for social welfare programs were also diverted, which were crucial for the lower middle class to have a chance at moving upwards and for returning soldiers to have a chance at adjusting back to a regular life. The middle class did feel the horrors of the war, mostly after it happened, but it would be the most damage done long term to the American economy from 1968 to 1981, known as the Great Inflation Era. As the government finally withdrew from Vietnam, the horrific wounds of the war still remained and cascaded into every part of American society. As the bloodied razor that caused this mutilation is placed on the blood-coated environment, there is no more pain to be caused. What was a proud and great nation now was filled with disgust and distrust for its government, having suffered at its own hand and leaving a deep scar that would always be remembered. This short film is only 6 minutes and has more layers of symbolism than most movies with runtimes 10 times longer. There's such a beauty to the power this film has, having only one set, one actor, one song, and no dialogue. We see how the shiny, almost sterile bathroom is completely bloodied by one man's self-mutilation. The song I Can't Get Started, covered by Bunny Berrigan from 1937, is the only sound in the film, providing a jazzy, upbeat tune about being unable to make progress with a love interest, provides not only a contrast to the dark theme of the film, but also representing America's inability to stop its own self-mutilation, unable to get started with an exit from Vietnam. Considered a black comedy, I think The Big Shave is more so a horror film. I personally didn't see what could quite be interpreted as funny from this movie, but maybe it's just like a time thing. Like at the time it was seen as comedic, but I think it's a horror movie. The way the film can convey the irreparable damage done by a government to its own society and image through war without seeing a moment of anything war-related on screen, that is truly masterful storytelling. A story that is simple yet layered, silent yet critiquing endlessly. It wouldn't have the same impact today, but what it stands for is a large scar on American history and its veterans. Martin Scorsese gives us a glimpse of what his bright future in film would hold, but he also gave us an uncomfortable truth of what was happening at that time. I truly love the impact of this film. It's nothing like I've ever seen before, and I don't know if anything will come along like it. If you have 6 minutes to kill, I highly suggest giving The Big Shave a watch. Whether in it for the uncomfortable experience or for the critique of the US government, it's worth your time. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought down below, and I will catch you in the next one.